I am standing in my lawyer's office right now, holding a crumpled tax document that just got rejected by the IRS. The numbers are so wrong, they would be funny if they weren't tied to 6 years of my life's work. My older brother Marcus apparently thought he could run a landscaping business the same way he runs his mouth at family dinners. 3 years ago, my dad handed him the company I built from nothing because Marcus had kids to feed. Turns out, giving someone a business doesn't automatically give them the brains to run it. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever had family, completely underestimate what you've built, and make sure to subscribe, because trust me, this journey gets wild. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up in our house meant living in Marcus's shadow. He was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the kid who had to prove himself every single day. Our mom passed away when I was 15, and after that, Dad became even more protective of Marcus and harder on me. Marcus had already married his high school sweetheart Sarah by then, and they were working on starting their family. Meanwhile, I was just the younger brother trying to figure out his place in the world. Marcus always had this easy charm that made people like him instantly. He could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within minutes. But when it came to actual work, he was a different story. He would start projects with great enthusiasm, then lose interest halfway through. Dad always made excuses for him, saying Marcus was a big-picture guy who wasn't meant for detail work. I learned early that if I wanted something done, I had better do it myself. When I turned 16, I started cutting grass for our neighbors just to have spending money. Mrs. Henderson next door was my first customer, and she paid me $20 to mow her small front yard. It wasn't much, but something about transforming that overgrown mess into something beautiful gave me a satisfaction I had never felt before. I spent that evening watching YouTube videos about lawn care, then moved on to basic landscaping techniques. What started as a weekend job quickly became an obsession. I would spend hours at the library reading books about plant biology, soil composition, and landscape design. I saved every penny I earned to buy better equipment. My first real purchase was a used Toro mower from Craigslist that cost me $300. It was beaten up and needed repairs, but I spent weeks learning how to fix it myself. By my senior year of high school, I had a regular route of 8 houses that I maintained year-round. I offered more than just mowing. I learned how to trim hedges, plant seasonal flowers, and even do basic irrigation repairs. My customers started referring me to their friends, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle alone. Dad would shake his head and mutter about me wasting time on yard work when I should be focusing on getting into college. The truth was, I had found my calling. While my classmates were stressing about SAT scores and college applications, I was building something real. I researched different grass types, studied seasonal planting schedules, and even taught myself basic accounting to keep track of my growing income. By graduation, I was making more money than most part-time jobs would pay. Instead of going to college right away, I made the decision that would define the next 6 years of my life. I was going to build a real landscaping business. Dad was furious, calling it a waste of my potential. Marcus laughed and said I would be back in school within a year. But I knew what I was doing, even if nobody else believed in me. I started small but smart. I incorporated as Richard's Lawn and Landscape Solutions and got proper business insurance. I reinvested every dollar back into better equipment and expanding my knowledge. I took online courses in landscape design and even drove 3 hours to attend weekend workshops on advanced irrigation systems. While my friends were partying at college, I was building something that would last. The breakthrough came during my second year when Mrs. Patterson asked me to completely redesign her backyard. It was my first major project worth $8,000, and I was terrified of messing it up. I spent weeks planning every detail from the stone walkway to the placement of each shrub. When I finished, her backyard looked like something from a magazine. She was so thrilled that she threw a garden party just to show off the work, and 3 of her guests hired me on the spot. By my 4th year in business, I had built something I was genuinely proud of. My client list had grown to 40 loyal customers, ranging from weekly maintenance accounts to major design projects. I had invested in professional-grade equipment, including a brand-new zero-turn mower and a small truck with a custom trailer. My annual revenue had reached $180,000, which felt incredible for someone who had started with a $20 lawn mowing job. The real validation came when I got invited to bid on a project in Riverside Heights, the most expensive neighborhood in our county. The Johnsons wanted a complete backyard transformation, including a stone patio water feature and carefully planned garden beds that would look beautiful in every season. When I submitted my proposal for $45,000, I was sure they would laugh me out of their house. Instead, Mrs. Johnson said it was exactly what they were looking for. That project changed everything. I had to hire 3 part-time employees to help with the workload. Jake was a college student who worked summers, Danny was a retired guy who loved being outdoors, and Luis was a recent immigrant with an incredible work ethic and natural talent for plant care. For the first time, I felt like I was running a real business instead of just working for myself. The Johnson project took 3 months to complete, and every day brought new challenges that pushed me to grow. I learned how to coordinate with electricians for landscape lighting work, with stonemasons for the patio, and even design a custom irrigation system for the different plant zones. When we finished, their backyard looked like something you would see in Better Homes and Gardens magazine. But the best part wasn't the money or even the beautiful finished product. It was the moment Mr. Johnson shook my hand and said, "Richard, you've exceeded every expectation we had. We'll be recommending you to everyone we know." That handshake felt like official recognition that I had made it. I wasn't just the kid cutting grass anymore. I was a legitimate business owner who delivered professional results. Word spread quickly through Riverside Heights. Within 6 months of finishing the Johnson project, I had contracts with 4 more families in the neighborhood. Each project was bigger and more complex than the last. I was designing outdoor kitchens, installing retaining walls, and creating landscape plans that would mature beautifully over years. My reputation was solid, my crew was reliable, and my bank account was healthier than I had ever imagined possible. Dad finally started paying attention to what I had built. He would brag to his friends at the hardware store about his son's landscaping business. He even started calling me for advice when he wanted to improve his own yard. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had earned his respect and admiration. Marcus would joke that I was making him look bad, but it seemed good-natured. I thought we had moved past the childhood competition. I was so focused on growing the business that I completely missed the warning signs. Marcus had been laid off from his insurance job 6 months earlier, and Sarah was struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments on just her teacher's salary. When Dad started making comments about how I should help family more, I assumed he meant maybe giving Marcus some part-time work during his job search. I never imagined he was developing a completely different plan for my future. The first real hint came during a family barbecue in late spring. Dad kept steering the conversation toward how important it was for successful family members to lift up those who were struggling. He talked about how I didn't have the same responsibilities as Marcus, who had 2 young children depending on him. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation. Looking back, I realize he was testing the waters for what came next. The family meeting that changed my life happened on a Sunday evening in June. Dad called and asked me to come over for dinner, saying he wanted to discuss something important with the whole family. I figured it was about planning Mom's memorial service, or maybe dividing up some of her belongings we had kept in storage. I certainly never expected him to hand over my entire business to my older brother. We gathered in the living room after dinner. Sarah was holding 5-year-old Emma, while 8-year-old Tommy played video games in the corner. Dad cleared his throat and launched into a speech about family responsibility and taking care of each other. Then he looked directly at me and said the words that still echo in my mind today. "Richard, you need to transfer the business to Marcus. He has a family to support and you're young enough to start over." The room went completely silent, except for the sound effects from Tommy's game. I stared at Dad, waiting for him to say he was joking, but his expression was dead serious. Marcus was looking down at his hands, refusing to make eye contact with me. Sarah was nodding like this made perfect sense. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach by someone I trusted completely. "This is the company I built from nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've worked 16-hour days for 6 years to create this. You can't just give it away like it's a used car." Dad's expression hardened, and he launched into a lecture about how family comes first and how I didn't understand the pressure of supporting children. According to him, I was being selfish by holding on to something I could easily rebuild when Marcus needed it right now. Sarah decided to join the conversation, explaining how they were behind on their mortgage and car payments. She talked about how Tommy needed new school clothes and Emma was starting preschool in the fall. She made it sound like I was personally responsible for their financial struggles by refusing to hand over my business. The worst part was how reasonable they all made it sound, like transferring 6 years of my life's work was just the obvious solution to Marcus's unemployment. Marcus finally spoke up, but only to promise that this was temporary. He said he would pay me back once he got the business profitable and found his footing. He talked about how we could be partners eventually, how this could bring our family closer together. His voice was full of sincerity, and for a moment, I almost believed him. But then I looked around the room and realized that nobody was asking what I wanted. They had already decided my fate without including me in the conversation. The argument that followed was ugly and painful. I raised my voice for the first time in years, asking how they could expect me to give up everything I had worked for. Dad accused me of being ungrateful for everything the family had given me over the years. Sarah said I was being heartless toward my own nephews. Marcus just sat there looking miserable, caught between his desperate need for income and his guilt over what they were asking me to do. When I refused to agree immediately, Dad played his final card. He reminded me that he had co-signed the original business loan when I was 18, and legally he still had some claim to the business assets. He didn't threaten me directly, but the implication was clear. I could transfer the business voluntarily, or he could make my life very complicated through legal channels. Either way, Marcus was getting what he needed to support his family. I left that night feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The people who were supposed to support me had just systematically dismantled everything I had built. I spent the next 3 days avoiding their phone calls while I tried to figure out what to do. Deep down, I knew I was going to give in. Not because I thought it was right, but because fighting my entire family felt impossible. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Nobody in my family would speak to me normally. Every conversation was about when I was going to do the right thing and help Marcus. Dad stopped returning my phone calls entirely. Marcus sent me long text messages about how grateful he would be and how this would only be temporary. Sarah even had the kids call me to ask why Uncle Richard didn't want to help their daddy find work. My customers started asking questions about management changes and whether their service contracts would be honored. Word was getting around that something was happening with my business, and I could see the uncertainty in their faces. Mrs. Johnson, who had been my biggest supporter, pulled me aside after I finished her weekly maintenance and asked if everything was okay. I assured her that nothing was changing, but I could hear the lie in my own voice. The pressure became unbearable when Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening. He looked older than I remembered, and I could see genuine worry in his eyes. He explained that Marcus was falling apart under the stress of unemployment, and that Sarah was talking about taking the kids and moving back to her parents' house. According to Dad, I was the only one who could save their marriage and keep the family together. He painted a picture of Marcus's desperation that was hard to ignore. The unemployment benefits had run out. They were 2 months behind on their mortgage, and Marcus was spending his days sending out resumes that never got responses. Dad said that Marcus was a good man who just needed a chance to prove himself in a business environment. He promised that once Marcus got established, we could work out a fair arrangement that would benefit both of us. But what really broke down my resistance was when Dad started talking about Mom. He said that she would have wanted me to take care of my brother, that family loyalty was one of the most important values she had tried to teach us. He reminded me of how she used to make us promise to look out for each other no matter what happened. Using her memory to manipulate me was a low blow, but it worked. I made the appointment with my lawyer for the following Monday. Transferring a business involves more paperwork than most people realize. I had to sign over the corporate assets, the customer contracts, the equipment leases, and even the business bank accounts. My lawyer kept asking if I was sure about this decision, and I kept saying yes, even though everything in my gut was screaming no. The day of the transfer, Marcus showed up at the lawyer's office looking nervous and grateful. He kept thanking me and promising that he wouldn't let me down. He talked about his plans for expanding the business and how we could work together to make it even more successful. His enthusiasm was almost convincing, but I noticed he had no specific ideas about how landscaping actually worked. When I handed over the customer list that had taken me years to build, along with detailed notes about each property's specific needs and preferences, Marcus barely glanced at it. He was more interested in the bank account balances and the equipment inventory. That should have been my first clue about his priorities, but I was too emotionally drained to pay attention to red flags. The final moment came when I had to introduce Marcus to my crew. Jake, Danny, and Luis had been working with me for over a year, and they knew my business almost as well as I did. I could see the confusion and concern in their faces when I explained that Marcus would be taking over operations. They were professional about it, but I could tell they were worried about their job security under new management. Walking away from that lawyer's office felt like attending my own funeral. I had just buried 6 years of passion, hard work, and dreams because my family had decided that Marcus's needs were more important than my achievements. I drove home in silence, trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing. But deep down, I knew I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The first signs of trouble came within 30 days. Jake called me one evening, clearly frustrated and looking for advice. Marcus had scheduled 3 major installations for the same week without checking equipment availability or crew capacity. The Johnson family's maintenance had been delayed twice because Marcus forgot to order the specialized fertilizer their lawn required. Mrs. Patterson was asking questions about why her service quality had suddenly dropped. I told Jake I couldn't get involved anymore, but I could hear the worry in his voice. He had bills to pay and couldn't afford to lose this job, but he was watching the business reputation I had spent years building get damaged week by week. The professional standards I had established were being ignored, and longtime customers were starting to notice the difference. Month 2 brought more serious problems. Danny quit without notice after Marcus tried to make him work an extra day without overtime pay. Luis was doing his best to maintain quality, but he was overwhelmed trying to handle jobs that normally required a full crew. 3 customers canceled their contracts, including the Hendersons, who had been with me since my very first year. Each lost customer felt like watching pieces of my life's work crumble away. The breaking point came when the Peterson family filed a formal complaint about a design installation that had gone completely wrong. Marcus had attempted to install a drainage system without understanding the slope calculations I had carefully planned. Their backyard flooded during the first heavy rain, damaging their deck and flower beds. The repair costs alone were more than the original project fee, and our business insurance rates skyrocketed as a result. Jake was the only original employee left by month 3, and he was barely hanging on. He would text me updates about the chaos, not to complain, but because he knew I cared about the customers who had trusted me for years. Equipment was breaking down because Marcus didn't understand the maintenance schedules. Customer payments were being processed incorrectly. The professional reputation I had built was being destroyed one mistake at a time. The phone call that changed everything came at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Marcus was crying, which I had never heard before in my entire life. His voice was shaking as he explained that he was drowning in problems he didn't know how to solve. Equipment rental companies were demanding past due payments. 3 more customers had canceled their contracts. Sarah was threatening to take the kids and move in with her parents because their financial situation had gotten worse instead of better. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," Marcus sobbed into the phone. "I thought this would be easier. I thought I could figure it out as I went along. But every decision I make seems to create 2 new problems. The customers are angry, the employees don't respect me, and I'm losing money every week. I need your help, Richard. I can't do this without you." For a moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered sitting in that lawyer's office, signing away everything I had built because my family had decided his needs were more important than my work. I thought about the 6 years I had spent learning every aspect of this business, the relationships I had carefully cultivated, and the reputation I had earned through consistent excellence. "You wanted the business," I said quietly. "Now you have it. Figure it out yourself." I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. Whatever happened next was his responsibility, not mine. The situation got desperate enough that Dad swallowed his pride and came to see me. It was the first time he had been to my apartment since I moved out, and I could see how uncomfortable he was asking for my help. He explained that Marcus was on the verge of losing everything, including his house. The business was failing so badly that bankruptcy seemed inevitable. According to Dad, I was the only one who could save the situation. "This family needs to stick together," Dad said, using the same tone he had used when convincing me to give up the business in the first place. "Your brother made some mistakes, but he's learning. If you come back and help him get things back on track, we can all move forward together. Think about Tommy and Emma. Do you really want to watch them lose their home because of pride?" I looked at this man who had raised me, who had taught me about hard work and responsibility, and I realized that he had never truly understood what I had accomplished. To him, my business was just a convenient solution to Marcus's problems, not 6 years of dedication and skill development. He had never seen it as my life's work because he had never taken me seriously as anything more than the younger son. "When you gave my business to Marcus, you told me I was young enough to start over," I replied. "You were right. I am starting over. But I'm starting over without any of you." Dad left angry, muttering about how I had become selfish and ungrateful. But for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with my decision. I had already been working on my comeback plan. 3 weeks after Marcus took over my original business, I filed paperwork for a new company called Premier Outdoor Solutions. I positioned it as a high-end landscape design firm that specialized in luxury residential projects. Instead of competing with my old business for the same customers, I was targeting a completely different market segment. My first call was to Mrs. Johnson. I explained that I had started a new company and was offering exclusive services to clients who wanted premium quality work. She didn't hesitate for even a second. "Richard, we've been hoping you would call. The work on our property since you left has been disappointing. When can you start our fall renovation project?" Within a week, I had contracts with 4 families from Riverside Heights, including 2 new clients who had heard about my work through referrals. But I had one more card to play. During the transition period, I had discovered some concerning irregularities in how Marcus was handling the business finances. He was reporting significantly lower income to reduce his tax burden, but he was also claiming personal expenses as business deductions. The numbers didn't add up, and I realized he was essentially committing tax fraud to try to keep the business afloat. I spent an evening carefully documenting everything I had observed, then sent an anonymous tip to the IRS about potential tax violations at my former business. I included copies of customer contracts that showed the real income levels versus what was being reported. It wasn't revenge exactly, it was justice. If Marcus wanted to run a business, he needed to follow the rules that every other business owner had to follow. 6 months later, I was standing in my lawyer's office, holding the letter that had started this whole story. The IRS had completed their investigation of Marcus's business practices, and the results were even worse than I had expected. They found systematic underreporting of income fraudulent business expense claims and failure to pay proper employment taxes for the crew. The penalties and back taxes totaled over $35,000, which was more than the business had in assets. Marcus tried calling me a dozen times that week, but I didn't answer. When he finally caught me at the grocery store, he looked like he had aged 5 years in the past few months. His face was pale, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had lost enough weight that his shirt hung loose on his frame. He begged me to help him deal with the IRS situation, claiming he had made honest mistakes because he didn't understand business accounting. "You told me you could figure it out," I reminded him. "You told Dad you just needed a chance to prove yourself. This is you proving yourself." He started crying right there in the produce section, talking about how he was going to lose his house and how Sarah was filing for separation. But I felt nothing except a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The business that had taken me 6 years to build collapsed completely within 8 months under Marcus's management. The remaining customers scattered to other landscaping companies. The equipment was repossessed or sold to pay debts, and the business name I had created was permanently associated with poor service and legal troubles. Jake found work with a competitor, Luis started his own small lawn care service, and Danny retired for good. Meanwhile, Premier Outdoor Solutions was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. My first-year revenue reached $280,000, which was more than my original business had ever generated. I expanded to 8 full-time employees and started taking on commercial projects for office buildings and shopping centers. The local business journal featured me in their Young Entrepreneurs to Watch section, and I was invited to speak at the Chamber of Commerce about building successful small businesses. The real satisfaction came from knowing that I had rebuilt everything bigger and better than before. I wasn't just surviving my family's betrayal, I was thriving in spite of it. Every new contract felt like proof that my skills and dedication were valuable, regardless of whether my family recognized them. I had learned to validate myself, instead of seeking approval from people who had never truly supported my dreams. Dad eventually reached out to me not to apologize, but to ask if I could help Marcus find work with one of my competitors. I politely declined and suggested that Marcus use this as an opportunity to develop new skills in a different industry. I wasn't cruel about it, but I wasn't going to fix problems that weren't mine to solve. Some lessons can only be learned through natural consequences. The healing process took longer than I expected. For months, I carried anger about how my family had treated me and my accomplishments. I felt bitter about the years I had spent trying to earn respect that was never going to come. But gradually, I realized that their inability to appreciate my work said more about them than it said about me. I had built something impressive twice, which proved that my success wasn't luck or accident. I learned to set healthy boundaries with family members who had shown they would prioritize their own needs over fairness and respect. I developed friendships with other business owners who understood the dedication required to build something from nothing. Most importantly, I discovered that my self-worth couldn't depend on recognition from people who had already demonstrated their inability to see my value. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are. My family showed me that they would sacrifice my achievements to solve their own problems without hesitation. That knowledge was painful, but it was also liberating. I stopped trying to earn approval from people who had already proven they didn't respect what I could accomplish. I learned that loyalty isn't about blood relations, it's about respect and fairness. Real family members celebrate your success instead of trying to redistribute it. They support your dreams instead of treating them as disposable solutions to their problems. Building my own chosen family of business partners, employees, and friends who actually valued my contributions taught me what healthy relationships should feel like. Now, when I see other young people being overlooked or undervalued by their families, I tell them this: your worth isn't determined by whether others recognize it. Build your own path, set your own standards, and let your success speak for itself. Sometimes walking away from people who don't appreciate you is the only way to find people who will. What lessons have you learned about family loyalty versus personal boundaries? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and building success on your own terms. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter just as much as everyone else's problems. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them all wrong through your own success.